You're here for the Giants versus the Cowboys, but more so to try and win $1 million rooskies. So to do that, here are the 7 guys you're going to want to play. And let's start with who is probably the best play on the slate at $7,600. It's Sterling Shepard, because he's the Giants' clear wide receiver 1. Last week, he saw 10 targets, which was a 32% target share, which would have finished second in the entire NFL last year. But that's not all, because he played on 90% of the snaps. Because the Giants' big free agent signing from last summer in Kenny Gallup, you know, the wide receiver who this specific year is paid the most out of any receiver in terms of what's on the books, $21.5 million. He saw just 2 snaps last week, which means that Shepard is the clear number 1 receiver for the Giants, and it shows on paper. He averages 14.3 fantasy points, which would crush it on this showdown slate if he just got his average, and 8.3 targets per game with Daniel Jones. And now he has a strong matchup, because he'll see all 3 of these Cowboys cornerbacks. He'll be in the slot a lot, where he'll see Jordan Lewis, the former Michigan cornerback from college, and he allows a 75% catch rate this year. And then if he sees the other guys on the outside, Anthony Brown, who's given up 12 catches through 2 games and 160 yards, that's a good matchup. And Trevion Diggs, who was good at times last week, but he's already given up 10 receptions through 2 weeks. So yeah, it's a nice spot for Shepard to get 5+ catches. And I'm actually pretty stunned to see his over-under at just 36.5 receiving yards. I mean, there's dudes injured. Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, receivers are injured for this team. Shepard's probably going to see 7+ targets. I have him for 50+ receiving yards. I take this over 36.5. You can too, with a free bet up to $100 when you use the link in the description below on our partners' Prize Picks. You get a free bet up to $100. I like Shepard, but I also like his teammate, and that's going to be $5,400 Richie James, the former 49er. Because as I mentioned, there's wide receivers on the injury report for the Giants, and depending on when you're watching this, they're probably already ruled out. Wan'Dale Robinson hasn't practiced this week as of Friday late afternoon. Kadarius Toney hasn't practiced this week. These guys are unlikely to play. So here's what you need to know about Richie James. James played 75% of the snaps week 1. He ran 21 routes. Now last week he played a lot less snaps, only 40%, but he still ran 21 routes. So when he was out there, when they weren't blocking, when they didn't have 2 tight end sets, so a receiver comes off the field, he was still running those routes. And each week, it's crazy, but he saw exactly 6 targets, 5 catches, and 21 routes in each of the first 2 weeks, which means he saw a 29% target rate, which is very good. So consider him a strong value for Monday night, and then think about playing his quarterback. And that will be Daniel Jones, who is somehow cheaper than Cooper Rush this week. It's only by $200, but he has a higher team total, obviously more experience. In my opinion, he has the better weapons. And this year, it's kind of weird for Daniel Jones. He has not been efficient, just 24th in yards per attempt, but he's been very accurate. He's top 5 in accuracy. So this offense, Brian Dable from Buffalo, the new head coach, is scheming good plays for Jones. So really what this means is they don't have a player winning downfield. So the offense lacks explosive plays in the passing game. But Jones has made up for it very surprisingly with his legs. He ranks 4th amongst all quarterbacks with 8 carries per game right now, and he already has 4 red zone carries on the year. If he scores a rushing touchdown in this game on this showdown slate below $10,000, yeah, he's going to be needed. And look, he does have a pretty tough matchup here. The Giants actually have a negative 20% offensive line advantage compared to the league average this week, and it's because they're facing Micah Parsons, potentially the best player in the entire NFL. And the Cowboys overall on a defense, a lot because of Parsons, ranks 2nd in pass rush so far. However, the Giants have a secret weapon, and that would be the 3rd-year tackle Andrew Thomas, the former 1st-round pick, who right now is the number 1 offensive lineman in the entire NFL through 2 weeks. So expect Jones to throw 30 times, run 5 times, and have a decent game. And similar can be said for $6,400 Dalton Schultz, who has a ton of upside, especially in the captain spot, because he's currently running around on 92% of these quarterbacks dropbacks for Dallas, which is top 3 amongst all tight ends. And now last week he only saw 4 targets, but it's because he only ran 23 routes. And the reason why he ran less routes was he was asked to block more. But that's not a concern this week because Dallas has the number 1 offensive line advantage against the Giants defensive line. So he's not going to be asked to block, and you can expect more of his week 1 usage where he saw 9 targets, 7 receptions, and he put up a top 6 fantasy finish at the position. If he scores 13 points this week at that price tag in DFS, yeah, he's going to be needed. And now let's talk about his quarterback, Cooper Rush. Rush is surprisingly the 3rd highest priced player on the slate, but he's still below $10,000, and honestly, he wasn't the worst last week. He ended up averaging an above average 7.6 yards per attempt, meaning he was getting some plays downfield. He completed more than 60% of his passes and beat his player prop last week, so he beat the expectation with over 230 passing yards. And now he sees a beneficial matchup, because we talked about the offensive line advantage, and it's because the Giants rank 29th right now in pass rush, and this is a good thing for an inexperienced quarterback in rush. And as of right now, the Cowboys offensive line is still top 10 in the league. You combine those things with Dalton Schultz running more routes, and it's actually a sneaky spot for Rush, which is why I like him over 207.5 passing yards. I have him in the 230s this week, so I think this is a fantastic prop. The last time we had a showdown slate on Thursday night, we went 4-0 in props, so be sure to take this one and some of the other ones with that free bet with the link in the description below. Code SAL22 on prizepicks.com. You get your schmacks and your dollar rooskies. Now, this next player is pretty interesting, and it's because he's the most expensive player player on the slate in Saquon Barkley. I mean, he's $1,600 more than anybody else, and it's a really interesting matchup because the Cowboys are average against the run, but they rank right here number 1 in tackling. And the Giants' offensive line ranks 32nd in run blocking, and they create the least amount of yards before contact. So that means that Saquon is going to have to fight for every yard and create his own yards, which he's been very good at doing so far this year. He's created 194 yards on his own this year, the second most in the NFL. Now that factors in his broken tackles, his elusiveness, and his yards after contact. But how long can he sustain this, especially against a good tackling team? It's very likely that we're going to need to rely on targets this week from him, which he's done each of the last couple of weeks. He has 3 catches in each of the games so far, but we're going to need more than that to pay off this price tag. So I'm actually a little bit iffy on Saquon at that price point, and I do take him under his rushing yards. If he gets there, I think it's from touchdowns, and I think it's going to be from the receiving game. Under 75.5 rushing yards this week for Saquon on Prize Picks down below. You can get that free bet if you would like to include this one as well. So Saquon I'm a little iffy on, but the other starting running back, Zeke, let's talk about him. Ezekiel Elliott is a much more favorable price point at just $8,400 this week. Now he is an underdog, but let's discuss. As of right now, Zeke has not topped 6 fantasy points in a game, so he has under 12 total points on the year. Pretty gross. However, he finds himself in his best matchup of the year. The Giants rank 25th at stopping the run. Plus, the Cowboys have the 6th best run blocking advantage of the week. And Zeke's usage hasn't been awful. He's played over 60% of the snaps each of the first 2 games so far, and last week it led to 17 total opportunities, 15 carries and 2 targets. But the problem with last week is Tony Pollard saw 7 targets. But here's why this is unsustainable. Because this man, Tony Pollard, he ended up seeing 7 targets on only 11 routes ran, which is like 64% of his routes led to a target, which is over 3 times the league average. So Zeke, who was running more routes last week, is more times than not going to see a lot more usage in the passing game. And since he's not been producing, he's likely to be lower owned at this price point, especially since he's more expensive than Sterling Shepard and Dalton Schultz. So you can get him at low ownership, and you can see my entire ownership projections and my point projections, lineup optimizer, and a whole lot more on Patreon down below. I use these same tools to win $30,000 and $70,000 last year in DFS showdowns. So if you're interested in joining the 1,000+ people utilizing these tools and winning some dollar rooskies right now, click the link in the description below. So we have to talk about the Cowboys receivers. You have Lamb at $10,200, fair price point, Gallup at $7,400, and Noah Brown at $6,800. And now here's the deal. CeeDee Lamb isn't a great play. He does average 10 targets per game and 3 starts for Cooper Rush, but he's not a great play. Jalen Tolbert might actually be active this week because they cut Dennis Houston, who played over 20 snaps last week, but this is something to monitor. Then there's Noah Brown, who scored a touchdown last week. He was pretty nice, but he overall struggles to get separation in the NFL. There's Michael Gallup, who's practicing in full this week, but if he plays, Mike McCarthy, head coach, said he would be limited. Then you have Simeon Foco, who's not the greatest type of athlete, but he is a little bit cheaper in DFS. This basically all boils down to none of them being great plays, but if you have the money, Lamb, I prefer him for the price discount off of Saquon, but then after that, I just prefer the tight end here in Dalton Schultz. And I like this sneaky wide receiver. And that's a nice value play at $5,000, David Sills, because there's not going to be Kadarius Toney most likely, and there's not going to be Wan'Dale Robinson. And last week, Sills was technically the wide receiver 2 behind Sterling Shepard. He ran 30 routes, and he ended up seeing 4 targets. And look, if he just catches 3 balls for 37 yards like he did last week and posts 7 fantasy points, that might be enough. But he obviously has a lot of upside if he's going to run 30+ routes this week, especially since Kenny Golladay is only running and playing 2 snaps. So these are your must-have players and players to be a little bit weary of for Monday night. We will be live before the game on this channel right here, so be sure you subscribe so you know when we're going live. And if you want to get the key DFS tools to increase your chances of winning more money playing DFS, that's the whole goal here, right? That's why we're here. Then click the link in the description to learn more.